Daughter chose her dad and stepmom even though they always rejected her for her step-siblings to represent as her real family at her wedding and placed me all the way back at her to be seated because she doesn't want anyone raising their eyebrows, but just an hour before her wedding she's a crying mess because her real family canceled last minute for a surprise family vacation, so now she's humiliated and mad because everyone's questioning her, including her own husband. I got pregnant with my daughter, Emily, when I was just 22. Her father, Mark, and I were college sweethearts thinking we'd be one of those couples who would make it work. But the reality of young parenthood hit hard, especially with Mark's growing career demands. Our relationship didn't survive the pressures, and we separated when Emily was 2. After that, I took on multiple jobs, putting aside my own plans to provide for her and give her some stability. Mark contributed monthly child support and the occasional weekend visit, but he stayed just involved enough to say he was there without any real effort to be a strong presence in her life. When Emily was 7, Mark remarried a woman named Sarah who had 2 young kids from her previous marriage. From the start, Sarah made it clear that she wanted their family to be whole and undivided, which meant that Emily's place with them was on uncertain ground. As time passed and Mark and Sarah had 2 more kids together, Emily's position in their family seemed to fade further. Her weekend visits became uncomfortable, and Sarah's cold attitude made her feel like an outsider in her own father's home. Family vacations, holidays, birthdays, all happened without her. With Mark and Sarah's family, photos rarely included her. The explanation was always something like, "Oh, she wasn't there that day," as if they'd just forgotten her. Despite all of it, Emily continued to crave her father's attention. By the time she was 12, I had remarried a kind man who treated her like his own. But Emily never let go of that deep need for her father's approval. Through her teen years, I watched her bend over backward to try to fit into Mark's family, even if it meant canceling plans with me and her stepdad at the last minute. She'd spend weekends waiting by the phone for a text from them, only to hear that their plans were just for the immediate family this time. Then last year, Emily got engaged to James. He's a wonderful man, deeply family-oriented and from a very traditional background. I could see that her focus on wedding planning was about much more than just a wedding. It was a chance for her to present herself as part of Mark's family, even more so because she knew James' parents placed a lot of importance on the family image. When Emily sat me down to talk about the seating arrangements, she explained that she wanted Mark, Sarah, and their kids in the front row as her real family, while I would be seated further back with my husband. She said it was so James' conservative family wouldn't raise eyebrows over the complicated family situation and would see a normal traditional family unit. Her words hurt, but I swallowed my feelings, telling her that I understood it was her day and that I'd respect her wishes. After all, I wanted her to feel that sense of belonging she'd been chasing for years, and it was her day. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early to help however I could. But an hour before the ceremony, I found Emily alone in the bridal suite, sobbing with her hands covering her face. She told me, barely able to get the words out, that Mark, Sarah, and their kids wouldn't be coming. They'd won a last-minute, all-inclusive vacation package and had already left for the airport. It was a too-good-to-pass-up trip that couldn't be rescheduled according to Mark's text. Emily was devastated, not only because they weren't there, but because she'd planned everything around the image of them as her real family. She'd put everything on the line to keep up the appearance of a happy family, and now in a single message, it had fallen apart. Emily was crying so hard, I could barely understand her words. She asked me if I could fill in for her father and sit in the front, saying that it wouldn't look right otherwise. Hearing her say that stung. Here I was, the mother who'd been there every step of her life, and now I was just a last-minute stand-in because her father had once again left her hanging. She only wanted me there because he didn't show up, not because she wanted her mom by her side. Still, I could see how hurt she was, so I held back my own hurt and took her hand. I helped her wipe her tears, fixed her makeup, and reassured her that everything would be okay. But I told her gently that I wouldn't be sitting in the front row. I explained that I had already been presented as the mother who left her husband and didn't care enough to stay involved, and that now being seated in the front as an afterthought wouldn't change how she'd chosen to see me. I couldn't be someone's replacement mother just because they'd failed her on such an important day. Emily looked at me and I could tell she was confused and hurt at the same time, but I gently suggested that we remove the reserved signs from the seats so that people could sit freely and there wouldn't be obviously empty seats where her real family should have been. The ceremony went ahead, but the tension was obvious. During the reception, I overheard several guests talking about how shocked they were that Mark's family had skipped the wedding for a vacation. Emily barely touched her food, and by the end of the night, she and James left early, leaving a quiet buzz among the guests who were confused and curious about her family situation. For a few days, I didn't hear from Emily, just a short text saying she needed time to process everything. I understood she was struggling, so I gave her space. But when she finally came to see me, her reaction took me by surprise. Instead of the empathy I'd expected, Emily accused me of abandoning her on her wedding day. She said it was outrageous and unforgivable that I wouldn't sit in the front row and that I'd left her to face everyone's questions about why her family wasn't there. In her mind, it was as if she'd forgotten that her father, who was supposed to be in that seat, had chosen a vacation over her wedding. It was like all her anger was suddenly directed at me because I hadn't stepped in to save her from the consequences of her own choices. Emily's words stung. I couldn't believe she was standing there accusing me of abandoning her after all the years I stood by her, raising her without much help from Mark. It was like all those memories of me working long hours to provide for her, making sacrifices to give her stability and being there for every major milestone suddenly didn't matter. She was acting like I'd chosen to be seated in the back to hurt her, not because that was what she'd asked for in the first place. I could not understand why was she angry with me when it was her father who had bailed and she herself had told me to stay at the back. But I stayed calm, trying to explain that I had respected her wishes by sitting in the back as she'd wanted at first, and that I had stepped aside to let her create the family image she had been trying so hard to show everyone. But Emily didn't want to hear it. She insisted that I had humiliated her in front of James's family by refusing to take that seat and for letting her father's absence be so glaringly obvious. She kept saying I should have just played along no matter how last minute her request was. I was at a loss. For the first time, I realized that Emily was unwilling to confront her own choices, and that deep down she still saw her father's family as real, even after they'd abandoned her on her wedding day. Since that conversation, things have been tense between us. I can't believe that after everything, Emily has chosen to turn her disappointment towards me instead of facing the reality of how her father treated her. I feel like I'm at a loss for how to move forward, wondering if there was ever anything I could have done to change her view of our family. What would you do if you were in my position? How can I reach out to her and help her see the truth of what really happened? Update 1. Hi guys. I'm not lying when I say I'm completely floored by the overwhelming responses I've received. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to share their advice, sympathy, and sometimes tough truths. I've been reading through hundreds of comments. It's been a whirlwind trying to absorb everyone's thoughts, but I'm grateful for the support and perspectives. I have to admit that I never expected so many people to care or to have such strong reactions to my story. I'd also like to address a few specific things that have come up repeatedly. First, to everyone who thinks I did my daughter wrong on her wedding day, I totally get where you're coming from. I can see why you might think I should have just set my feelings aside and taken the front seat when Emily asked me. I understand that it was her special day and maybe it's what I should have done for the sake of peace. That's honestly one reason I shared my story here, to get feedback and understand if I could have handled things differently. I'm not above admitting I might have made a mistake. And as hurtful as the situation has been, I'm still open to learning from it. To give a little background without going into too many details, I dedicated my whole life to raising Emily. Her dad was barely involved. I don't believe in the idea that she somehow owes me anything for that. I became a mom because I wanted to, and I knew it would mean sacrifices, so I never saw it as something for her to pay back. But after everything, the least I hoped for was respect. I'm not sure where or when, but somewhere along the way, Emily's feelings towards me started to shift. It went beyond just not respecting me. It turned into a kind of resentment, almost like I was roadblocked to her being part of her dad's perfect family. So when she asked me to sit in the back and then, at the last minute, expected me to fill in for her dad in the front row, it stung. Not just as her mom, but as a human being. Emily was old enough to understand the choices I'd made for her, but instead, she had chosen to treat me like an inconvenience in her life. So here we are now, and things have only gotten messier. Emily has taken to sharing her side of the story with extended family members, putting a very different spin on it. I'm suddenly being painted as the jealous, bitter ex-wife who supposedly refused to help out on her daughter's wedding day. According to what I've heard from a few relatives, she's told them I didn't want to cooperate because I was angry that Mark and his family was seated in front of me. She's also gone as far as suggesting that I was somehow envious of Mark and Sarah's relationship, which isn't even remotely true. I moved on from that relationship years ago, and my husband has been a wonderful partner and father figure to Emily. I never wanted to play petty games with Mark or his family. All I wanted was to be part of Emily's life without being sidelined or diminished. Now there's a whole wave of family members who've jumped to her defense, convinced I'm the evil mother who ruined her daughter's wedding. It's honestly baffling because these same relatives know the history of how Mark treated me and Emily. They know I raised her essentially as a single mom, and they know about the times Mark would cancel plans with her or go on trips without including her. But somehow, all of that is conveniently forgotten in light of Emily's version of events. I'd like to say it doesn't hurt, but it does. I've already received several heated calls and texts from family members who barely know the situation, telling me I should have been a bigger person and swallowed my pride for Emily's sake. I never realized just how deeply Emily's attachment to her father's image ran until now. Her version of the wedding day makes it sound like I had some grudge against her father's family and was making a scene out of bitterness. But the reality is I was doing what she asked even if it hurt. I'll be honest, part of me regrets not just sitting in that front seat and pretending everything was fine. Maybe it would have been easier for Emily, and maybe I wouldn't be dealing with this backlash from our family. But at the same time, I still feel like sitting in that front row as an alternative mother would have erased the years I spent being her only stable parent. I feel so torn because I love her, and I want her to be happy. But how much should a parent compromise before it starts to hurt their own self-respect? I didn't think that standing up for myself quietly by respecting her seating plan would turn into this big of a scandal. My husband, bless his heart, has been so supportive through all of this. He keeps reminding me that I did nothing wrong by respecting Emily's wishes and that her reaction after the wedding reflects her own internal struggles more than anything else. He's trying to get me to focus on the positives, but it's hard not to feel hurt, especially now that Emily's extended family drama has put me on the defense. I feel like every day I have to justify why I didn't step in and save Emily from her own choices. On top of everything, James, her new husband, reached out to me directly. He was polite, but stern, expressing his own disappointment in how the wedding day turned out and implying that maybe I could have done more to support Emily. I can tell he's caught between supporting his wife and understanding what really happened, but it adds to the sting knowing that even he might believe I let her down. I could sense in his voice that he didn't fully understand the weight of what I went through as Emily's mother, the long years of being the only one there for her. And now he's taking her side even though he himself was upset with her father for abandoning her on her wedding day. I never expected things to blow up like this, and now I'm left wondering if there's any way to make amends without sacrificing my own dignity. The idea of apologizing just to keep the peace feels wrong, but at the same time, I don't want this to create a permanent rift between us. I'm trying to find some kind of middle ground where I can respect my own boundaries and still extend an olive branch, but I'm honestly at a loss. Emily is my only daughter. No matter how hurtful her actions have been, I still want a relationship with her. But if that relationship comes at the cost of pretending her father was a good parent or downplaying my role in her life, I don't know if I can do it. Thank you again to everyone who has shared their thoughts and advice. This has been such a hard, emotional journey, and I'm truly grateful for the support. I'll keep you all updated if anything changes. Right now, I just feel like I'm standing at a crossroads trying to figure out which path will bring us closer without compromising who I am as her mother. Update 2. Hey, everyone, back again with more updates, and I truly wish it was under better circumstances. After the responses from my initial post, I've been doing my best to keep a level head, reminding myself that this situation is emotionally messy for everyone involved, but I'm honestly stunned at how things have evolved since the wedding. Just when I thought we might be able to cool off and let things settle, my ex, Mark, decided to reappear and twist the knife a little deeper. I had just started to feel like maybe some family members would be open to seeing my side, especially since I'd been flooded with messages about keeping the peace and letting bygones be bygones. But then, out of the blue, I received a call from Mark. At first, I was almost relieved, thinking he might finally be reaching out to take some responsibility for the mess his absence created at the wedding. After all, he left Emily on one of the biggest days of her life, and she was clearly devastated by it. But instead of any kind of apology, Mark jumped straight into criticizing me. He said that I had been an irresponsible mother for not stepping in to take care of our daughter when he couldn't be there. He actually used the words bad mother, telling me that I should have put aside whatever feelings I had and done what was necessary for Emily. Hearing this from him after years of stepping back while I raised our daughter on my own was honestly one of the most shocking moments I've had in a long time. The nerve he had, calling me to criticize my parenting after skipping out on the wedding himself for a vacation. My response was probably overdue. I told him that he had absolutely no right to question my role as a mother, especially after all the times he'd missed events, holidays, and milestones in Emily's life. I reminded him that he was the one who had let her down when she was vulnerable and feeling abandoned, not me. I tried to keep my voice level, but I also made it clear that I wasn't going to let him paint me as the villain while he skipped out to play family with Sarah and their kids on some tropical beach. Just as I was hoping this would be the end of it, I started receiving angry messages from Emily. She took her father's side almost instantly, calling me unsupportive and saying I had abandoned her on our wedding day. She even accused me of making the day about myself by refusing to sit in the front when she asked. It was like the entire conversation we'd had before the wedding about her seating preferences had evaporated from her memory. She acted like I was intentionally hurting her or refusing to be there, which couldn't be further from the truth. I kept asking her if she understood that her father had skipped out on the wedding entirely, but she wouldn't respond directly to that. When I asked for the reason he missed it, the so-called reason that made it all understandable, she dodged the question, accusing me of not being empathetic enough. My husband kept reminding me not to let their words get to me, to keep being firm but open, and that this was just part of Emily's learning process. It's hard to hear that though, because I worry that in trying to create this perfect family image with Mark, she's shutting herself off from reality. I tried explaining this to her gently, reminding her of all the times Mark had let her down before, but every attempt was met with more defensive messages. She kept bringing up the genuine reason he missed the wedding, but refused to actually tell me what that reason was. It's like she wants me to feel like there's something I missed, some big understanding that justifies her father's actions, but deep down, I know that's not the case. If there was a valid reason, she wouldn't have been left crying in her dressing room devastated and humiliated. Emily's texts have been relentless, accusing me of turning her special day into a circus because I didn't sit in the front row and didn't play into her vision of family unity. It's almost like she's rewritten the entire wedding day in her mind to place me as the person responsible for every little mishap. She's even started bringing up things from her childhood that I thought we had left behind. Old frustrations she never really voiced, like not being able to go on every school trip or afford all the same luxuries her step-siblings had. It feels like everything is pouring out at once, and suddenly my entire history as her mother is up for criticism. I've tried to be understanding, to respond with love, but every time I offer even the slightest reminder of what I did to raise her, she turns it into a weapon against me, accusing me of being self-centered. What hurts the most is seeing her bent over backwards to defend her father, even when the facts don't align. I keep reminding myself that she's hurt and might not be thinking clearly, that maybe she's just struggling to process her emotions. But it's painful to watch her act like the only person who truly abandoned her, Mark, is somehow the victim in all of this. My husband has suggested I give her space, hoping that time might help her see things more clearly. I'm trying to follow that advice, but it's hard to sit on the sidelines while my own daughter treats me like the enemy. A few family members have reached out offering support and saying they understand what I've been going through, but others have swallowed the version of events Emily's sharing. Now they're calling and messaging me too, telling me I need to get over myself and that family should come first. The irony of it all is that I spent my whole life making sure Emily was at the center of mine. And now it's like that was never even recognized. I poured my time, energy, and resources into making her feel loved and valued, and yet, here we are. As much as it pains me, I know I can't force her to understand everything that went into raising her. I can't make her see Mark for who he truly is if she isn't ready to see it herself. It's almost like she's blinded by her need for his approval, clinging to the hope that he'll finally give her the attention she craves. I've tried to be patient to give her the space she needs, but I'm reaching a point where I don't know how much longer I can keep defending myself to the one person I thought would always understand. I'm still holding out hope that maybe, eventually, Emily will see the full picture. Maybe she'll take a step back and realize that this perfect family image she's built around her father isn't the reality. But until then, I'm just trying to navigate the fallout, staying close to the few friends and family members who know the truth. If anything changes or if Emily has a change of heart, I'll keep you all updated. Thank you for your continued support and understanding. Update 3. Hi, everyone, back again, and I think this might actually be the last update. I wanted to let you all know how things have unfolded in the past few days. And although it's been an emotional roller coaster, I think we finally reached some clarity. After my last update, I was fully prepared to keep my distance and give Emily the time and space she needed. But then, to my complete surprise, her husband, James, reached out. He wanted to talk about everything that had happened since the wedding. And as it turns out, things on his end weren't exactly smooth either. He told me he was beginning to piece together the entire story and was starting to see the pattern more clearly. Apparently, not long after Mark returned from his vacation with Sarah and their kids, he made a point of going straight to Emily's house to talk. James told me that Emily was still hurt and upset about the wedding, but the moment Mark showed up, he had a whole speech prepared without giving her a chance to say anything. He launched into this dramatic apology, emphasizing how guilty he felt for missing her big day. He brought up his supposed regrets and heartfelt reasons, saying that he wished he could have been there to walk her down the aisle. But he followed that up with a long-winded explanation about how family obligations with Sarah's kids took priority, that everyone makes sacrifices, and that he hoped Emily would understand that he was doing his best as a father in his current family dynamic. What stunned me most, however, was James' reaction to all of this. He said that as Mark went on with his apology, he noticed how quickly Emily softened. It was like she'd been waiting her entire life to hear those words. And the moment her father started talking, she forgot about all the times he had let her down. Despite everything he had done, she was more than willing to accept his half-hearted apology and fall back into the familiar pattern of making excuses for him. When she later recounted her conversation with her father to James, she was convinced that Mark's absence was unavoidable and that I had blown things out of proportion. James told me that this turn of events had shocked him. He'd seen firsthand the effect that Mark's actions had on Emily during the wedding and all the drama that followed. To him, It was glaringly obvious that Mark's apology was just a way to shift the blame onto everyone else. But when he tried to bring this up to Emily, she became defensive, insisting that her father's reasons were valid, and that I was somehow in the wrong for holding on to the past. James was honest with me, saying that this caused a pretty big argument between them. He tried to explain to her that I had only ever been there for her and that I hadn't done anything to hurt her, and that maybe, just maybe, she was being manipulated by someone who was more interested in preserving his own image than being a genuine father. At this point, James reached out to a few of our relatives who had seen what happened at the wedding. He wanted their perspective to help him make sense of everything. Hearing their side, people who had always known how deeply I cared for Emily and how much I'd done to support her as she grew up, only reinforced his understanding of the situation. From their perspective, it became clear that this wasn't a one-time incident or misunderstanding, but the latest chapter in a pattern that had stretched over years. After talking to them, James sat down with Emily again, and this time, he really opened up about his concerns. He expressed how sad he was to see her willing to overlook her father's absence on her wedding day, all for the sake of keeping a vision of family unity that didn't truly exist. He asked her to think about who had always been there for her, who had never let her down. It was a difficult conversation for him, and he admitted to me that it didn't go well at first. Emily was resistant, unwilling to listen, and still held on tightly to the idea that somehow I was the one who had caused the problem. But he didn't give up. He asked her to take a step back and consider everything with fresh eyes. Emily resisted at first, but something must have clicked because shortly after their conversation, she decided to visit her father. This visit, however, turned out to be the eye-opener she needed. According to James, she arrived at her father's house hoping to find reassurance, some sign that he truly cared about the pain she'd been feeling. Instead, she found that Mark barely had time for her. In fact, he brushed her off, saying he was in the middle of preparing for yet another business trip and that if she needed to wrap up her melodrama quickly, he could spare a few minutes. His dismissiveness finally hit her. For years, she had been trying to fit herself into a family that would always place her last, a realization that I think broke her heart. She left feeling angry and hurt and finally recognized that maybe the problem hadn't been me or the way I'd handled things, but her father's consistent lack of empathy and accountability. It took her a few days to process, but eventually, I got a call from Emily. She was apologetic, sounding so different from the defensive person I'd heard from in the past few weeks. She admitted she had allowed herself to believe a fantasy version of her father, one where he could be the perfect dad she'd always longed for, and that in the process, she had projected her hurt and anger onto me. She said she now saw how she had pushed me aside, allowing herself to be blinded by the need for her father's approval. She apologized for the things she'd said and for expecting me to be a backup option at her wedding instead of recognizing all that I'd done as her primary parent. In that conversation, Emily admitted that she had always feared facing the truth about her father because it would mean letting go of something she'd held onto for most of her life. But she now understood that my decision to step back at the wedding wasn't a rejection of her. It was an act of self-respect, a way to show her that I wasn't willing to be treated like an afterthought. I'd be lying if I said everything has magically been fixed with a single apology. And while I wish Emily hadn't had to go through this pain to see things clearly, I'm grateful she's starting to see the reality of her family's dynamics. Emily and I have plans to meet up soon and talk more openly about everything. She and James are doing better, and she and I both know it's going to take time to rebuild what's been strained. But I'm hopeful that with time, we can reach a new understanding and respect for each other. Thank you all for your advice, support, and the many perspectives you've shared.